Today's video is sponsored by Attest, the consumer research platform. Find out more later in the video. Hey, 42 here. Unless you've spent your life in a cave eating bats and admiring your semi-translucent skin, you've probably heard of the legend of the lost city of Atlantis. Said to have existed about 11,500 years ago, Atlantis was a utopian civilization founded by demigods. The island was rich in gold, silver, precious metals, and exotic wildlife. And over time, the Atlanteans who lived there grew into a mighty naval power and an advanced society. But in a sadly familiar story, the people of Atlantis became greedy and morally bankrupt. So the gods sent them a gift, a night of cataclysmic destruction, involving earthquakes and volcanic eruptions so violent they sank Atlantis to the bottom of the sea, never to be seen again. Unlike the city of Atlantis, you won't be lost in the ocean of business when you use Attest, the consumer research platform. Ambitious businesses, you know the ones, they get ahead by understanding their ever-changing customers, what they think, how they behave, and why they buy. But how do you get to be one of those businesses? That's where Attest comes in. Attest gives you the clarity you need to make the choices for your customers that supercharge your business. It's rocket fuel for decision makers. You bring the questions. For example, who is my target customer? Is my brand activity working? And will this creative hit the mark? And Attest brings the answers in the style of a consumer research platform that's easy to use, coupled with reporting that's quick and insightful. Attest's in-house experts will help you ask the right questions and draw the best conclusions with data that is checked and verified not once, not twice, but 3 times over, making sure that in a world of too much information, you are able to cut through to what you need and stand out. Attest puts that power in your hands. They allow you to test every hunch, remove all doubt, and most of all, grow without guesswork. So, to get started with Attest today, head over to askattest.com/42, or just click the link below in the description. That's askattest.com/42, and start growing your business today. This is all according to Greek philosopher Plato, by the way, who first told that story around 360 BC. Unfortunately though, it seems his writings are the only records of this tragic event. It's sort of like one of those situations where you end up getting stuck next to some guy you don't know at a wedding. He won't stop banging on about how he invented memory foam, but NASA stole the idea from him when he was drunk. It's highly unlikely, but you just can't disprove it. Most scientists and historians agree Plato made the story of Atlantis up as a vehicle to teach some of his philosophical ideas, namely that pride comes before an earthquake. But there have always been those who believe Atlantis was real. Unfortunately though, they can't agree on where it was. The smart money, if you can call it that, is on the Greek island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea. Around 3,500 years ago, the island was home to an advanced civilization called the Minoans, who appeared to have been wiped out by a massive volcanic eruption, which sounds like a pretty great fit with the Atlantis story, apart from the minor issue that the two events took place around 6,000 years apart. Other suggested locations for Atlantis have included Bermuda, the Bahamas, Peru, India, Crete, Turkey, Britain, Sweden, Gibraltar, Indonesia, the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, or maybe even Antarctica. In other words, it could be anywhere. I would say scientists have been debating the topic for decades, but it turns out they've had much more important questions to answer, such as what happens when you fart in space. No, the whereabouts of the lost city of Atlantis are mostly argued over by people in caftans who listened to too much Donovan in the 60s. Luckily for them though, the answer was finally revealed in 2014 by Academy Award-winning actress Shirley MacLaine. According to MacLaine, Atlantis was originally situated in the area that we now know as the Canary Islands, a realization that apparently came to her while she was there on a film shoot. MacLaine says she's had visions of past lives in Atlantis, which she describes as a huge island continent built by so-called star nations. In case you're not up to speed with your celestial being terminology, star people are said to have either been enlightened aliens or their descendants, who are hiding amongst us, ready to usher in a new age of joy and prosperity for humankind. Introduced by Brad Steiger in his 1976 book Gods of Aquarius, the Star People have become a beloved trope of New Agers and other people who like singing at crystals. But if you listen to MacLaine talk, she doesn't necessarily strike you as someone who, at any moment, may try to sell you a dream catcher or burst into a chorus of Kumbaya. She has a very no-nonsense, pragmatic air about her as she describes the many past lives she can remember from countries around the world and periods across time. Could it be that she's onto something? Are Shirley MacLaine's recollections of past lives accurate? In other words, could reincarnation be real? Like the concept of life after death, plenty of people around the world believe in reincarnation. You might associate the idea with religions like Buddhism and Hinduism, which include the idea that we're all part of a cycle of death and rebirth tied to our actions in life, our karma. But reincarnation has also gained a larger following in the West in recent times, thanks to practices like past life regression, an experience under hypnosis in which you begin to recall or even relive past lives. Fans of the process say they're transported back into the past, sometimes thousands of years, where they see the world through the eyes of Cleopatra, or a Second World War soldier, or a Russian peasant girl, or a medicine man who sells fake therapies to people. Unfortunately, there isn't a shred of evidence to support the validity of past life regression. All we have to go on are the stories of those who've been through the therapy, and since many of those people believe in reincarnation in the first place, that's hardly an objective data set. The thing is, if you really were, say, the reincarnation of someone who lived hundreds, even thousands of years ago, you ought to possess some pretty bloody useful information about humanity's past. You might be able to speak a long-dead language, for example, or know details about the climate or geopolitical situation in your era, or perhaps the customs of civilizations that fell before written records began. Those who have undergone past life regression are suspiciously unable to provide information on any of these things, for the obviously simple reason that the only past lives they've actually ever lived are an old save file of The Sims. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to make some bold statement about reincarnation in general. It's a bit more complicated than that, as we're about to find out. I'm just saying that if someone who really wants to believe in reincarnation undergoes past life regression, you can be pretty darn sure they're going to end up with some incredible past life origin story about being an ancient prince or some other important historical figure. I'd actually be more inclined to believe in the whole thing if there were a few more devastated, reincarnated Hitlers and Pol Pots knocking around. None of this is to say that everyone who undergoes hypnosis and wakes up believing they used to be Elvis is intentionally trying to deceive themselves or others. They're simply the victims of human memory. If you've been following the channel recently, you'll know that we're all surprisingly susceptible to remembering things that never actually happened. For something you probably see as a non-fiction repository of your own life story, your memory is actually extremely creative, filling in blanks and connecting dots to create a comprehensible story of the past, even when parts of that past never actually took place. And it's this flair for invention that is probably behind many claimed instances of reincarnation. Several studies have demonstrated that people who believe they have lived past lives are significantly more likely to create false memories than the rest of us one and doneers. And a natural propensity to create false memories isn't only common in people who believe they've experienced past lives either. It turns out we've seen the exact same thing with people who claim they've been abducted by aliens. So yeah, that sore arse you've been telling everyone about may just be hemorrhoids after all. It's also been shown that the very act of undergoing past life regression itself increases your susceptibility to forming false memories. For this reason, the vast majority of medical practitioners consider it to not only be unscientific, but flat out unethical, since it violates a key part of the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm. As I've said, just because past life regression appears to be a pseudoscience, that doesn't mean reincarnation is automatically made up too. And there certainly seem to be plenty of reincarnation claims that have nothing to do with past life regression or hypnotism. For example, the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet, is regarded in his religion as the 14th reincarnation of a past Lama, or spiritual leader, who wished to be reborn to continue his work. In Tibetan Buddhism, the search for the new Dalai Lama begins as soon as the previous one dies, and it really is a search. In the case of Tenzin Gyatso, the current Dalai Lama, it took 4 years. To locate the new Dalai Lama, the high lamas of the religious order look for signs, including dreams or visions from Lamo Latso, the sacred lake. These signs should lead the lamas to the boy they believe to be the Dalai Lama's reincarnation. They then show him a mix of objects, some of which belonged to the previous Dalai Lama, and if the boy manages to accurately pick out his old gear, it's regarded as proof that he is indeed the reincarnated Lama. It's said that Tenzin Gyatso, for example, apparently picked out a bell and prayer beads belonging to the 13th Dalai Lama by shouting, "It's mine, it's mine." Then there's the story of the Pollock twins. In 1957, 2 sisters, Jacqueline and Joanna Pollock, were tragically killed in a car accident. Their parents were understandably devastated, but the next year they fell pregnant with twins, Jennifer and Gillian Pollock. Shortly after the twins' birth, the family moved away from the town in which their first 2 children had been raised. But when they moved back a few years later, the surviving twins started pointing out landmarks they could not possibly have recognized since they were only 3 months old when they left. Not long after, they started asking for toys that had belonged to their deceased sisters, despite never having seen the toys before. And they were also said to get hysterical when they saw moving cars. There's also the story of Dorothy Eady, also known as Omm Sety. Dorothy was born near London in January 1904, and for the first few years of her life, she had a regular childhood. Then, at the age of 3, she had a terrible fall down the stairs and was pronounced dead. Miraculously, an hour later, she sat up in bed, but from that day on, there was something different about her. Not long after the accident, the family visited the British Museum, where Dorothy became transfixed by the displays of ancient Egypt. She began kissing the feet of the statues, and when her mother tried to take her away, Dorothy begged to be allowed to stay with what she called her people. In the time that followed, Dorothy had recurring dreams of a particular building with columns surrounded by rich vegetation. She would also have episodes of intense sadness, during which she would beg her parents to take her home, even though she was already in her home. Then, one day, Dorothy was looking through some pictures of ancient Egypt when she found an image of the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. The picture matched the images in Dorothy's dreams, and she ran to her father telling him she'd finally found her home. Dorothy went on to study Egyptology and eventually married an Egyptian and moved to Cairo, where she had a child who she named Sety. Around this time, she began a strange practice called automatic writing. According to her husband, she would get up in the middle of the night in a trance-like state and write out pages of hieroglyphics. Over the course of 12 months, she filled more than 70 pages with this writing, which outlined her past life as a priestess in ancient Egypt in great detail. If by now you're rolling your eyes and muttering things about Brits getting too much sun, you're not alone. Dorothy Eady was met with plenty of skepticism about her supposed past life, but in 1956, she took a job in the Antiquities department at Abydos, the place she believed she'd lived in her previous life. It was after moving here that she took to being called Omm Sety, meaning Mother of Sety. In one visit to the temple, the chief inspector from the Antiquities department spontaneously tested Sety's claim of reincarnation by telling her to go, in complete darkness, and stand next to specific wall paintings, using only her supposed knowledge of the temple. She passed the test, despite the fact the locations of those paintings had never been published. She later told archaeologists where to find the remains of the temple garden, and she also pointed excavators to a hidden tunnel at the northern end of the temple, which nobody had known about before. Stories like these are hard to swallow because we assume there must be another explanation, but some pretty credible scientists are suggesting that events like this could be possible. To be fair, they're actually talking about a scientific basis for the existence of consciousness, but that's essentially what reincarnation is: the continuation of some form of consciousness from one life to another. In 1931, Nobel Prize-winning physicist and father of quantum theory, Max Planck, declared that he regarded consciousness as the fundamental essence that gave rise to matter. What this actually means in practice is a bit of a mystery. But at the heart of this somewhat oblique idea is one of the biggest discussions in physics today. Is the mind a mere byproduct of brain activity and the physical properties of the brain? Or is human consciousness something more? A physical thing in and of itself that functions and exists in ways we don't really understand yet. That might sound like the kind of nonsense a scientist will come out after tripping on magic mushrooms, but some of the brightest minds in human history, people like Erwin Schrödinger and Werner Heisenberg alongside Planck, have pondered this very question and come out thinking that the laws of physics as we know them can't entirely explain human consciousness. And ultimately, if we don't really understand what consciousness is, the existence of a soul, and by extension things like reincarnation, can't be definitively ruled out. Of course, not definitively ruling something out certainly doesn't mean it's true, but it leaves the door of possibility open just a crack. For now, reincarnation, like all questions about what happens after we die, is impossible to settle for certain. Our knowledge of physics, biology, and the universe simply isn't quite there yet. Perhaps we will find some way to test this scientifically in the future, but personally, I have my doubts. And there is one small issue with the idea of reincarnation that I haven't mentioned yet. The maths doesn't add up. Right now, we have almost 8 billion people on this planet, but 250 years ago, there were fewer than 1 billion. If everyone is reincarnated, where did the extra 7 billion souls come from? If you happen to be the reincarnation of Albert Einstein, perhaps you could just kindly drop the answer in the comments below. Thanks, and thanks for watching. Check out my new podcast, Random Interesting Facts, available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Link in the description below. Thanks.